Good afternoon, and welcome to my DMA lecture recital, Contextually Derived Rehearsal Strategies for Selected Choral Works Employing Aleatory. The intention of this document and accompanying lecture recital is to provide techniques for aleatoric choral music rehearsal based upon a strategic analysis of poetic and musical context. Aleatoric sections should be synthesized into more basic musical elements, assigned a dramatic function, and effortlessly transition between its non-aleatoric sections. The discovery of each of these functions should create a clear path for an efficient rehearsal plan and build confidence within singers. In the mid and late 18th century, a handful of German composers were composing for a new genre, a musikalisches Würfelspiel, musical dice game. Dice or other randomized variables, such as a person's name and knowledge of the formal construction of the prescribed dance forms, were needed to randomize and determine the proper order of playing the interchangeable measures of these pieces. The toss of dice, or alia in Latin, challenged musicians to create and perform music in an aleatoric fashion. 200 years later, the role of chance once again created a new field of and direction for music, aleatoric music. Established in the 1950s, modern aleatoric composition, also known as indeterminacy or chance operations, was established by the New York School, comprised of composers such as John Cage, Christian Wolff, Earl Brown, and Morton Feldman. And in 1954, Werner Meyer Epler defined aleatory as the use of controlled and intentioned randomness in performance. The use of aleatory can also be thought of as the task of permanently making a composition incomplete. By including aleatory within a work, the composer is entrusting the performers to ensure that each performance contains newly created aspects, never to be duplicated. Pragmatically, two performances will never be the same. However, the spiritual intention of most Western art music desires precision and its duplication to be at its core. Aleatory music, or aleatoric music, improvisatory in nature with its focus on randomness, demands a new reaction and a new sound to be created. Choral aleatory presents somewhat of a contradiction in performance. It asks the whole to divide. Aleatory requires an ensemble whose usual concern is for clarity of sound through the unity of voices to dissolve into its separate and possibly unequal parts. Composers use aleatoric techniques so that the individual singer is heard not as a solo instrument, but a voice among many, and that the collective result is heard as one. In aleatory, dramatic force is increased through individual efforts instead of unified sound. However, the individual singer in an ensemble may not be as willing of a participant when they are forced to become a de facto soloist. As with any piece of music, a conductor must prepare their ensemble to properly portray the composer's intended emotion or effect. This task is made increasingly problematic with young or inexperienced ensembles. With the added novelty of aleatory and its notation, some ensembles will at times be burdened by the technicalities of delivery rather than the dramatic presentation, their apprehension or lack of focus diminishing the resulting aural effect. Most apprehension towards aleatoric choral music can be overcome with a solid foundation in ensemble rehearsal techniques and the ability to recognize and isolate the aleatoric variables. In preparation for the performance of an aleatoric choral piece, the following characteristics should be determined: the general category of the aleatory as determined by its variability, the context of the aleatory in terms of the poetry or prose used, the musical intention in using aleatory relative to the non-aleatoric sections, and the experience of the choir members with aleatoric pieces. Musicologist Paul Griffiths classifies aleatory into three categories: aleatory used in composition, performance, and notation. Only a handful of compositions, including John Cage's Music for Changes from 1951, fall into the first category. Yannis Xenakis created a subset of this composer-generated aleatory that he termed stochastic music, in which mathematical algorithms were employed in their composition. The second category includes any piece of music in which the composer has given compositional control to the performer. An example is Krzysztof Penderecki's choral writing in his Passio et Mors Domini Nostri Jesu Christi Secundum Lucam, or St. Luke's Passion, from 1966, one of the most well-known large-scale aleatoric choral works. Works in this third category possess non-standardized forms of music notation in which the interpretation of the notation is the aleatoric element. An example of this is Witold Lutosławski's Trois Poèmes d'Henri Michaud from 1962 and 63, the second movement of which I cover in the document, but you maybe don't get to see it. Conductor, I forgot to take that part out. A conductor should determine what musical elements are aleatoric. This will help to separate and more efficiently rehearse the aleatory. Rehearsal of an aleatoric section should begin with non-aleatoric elements. Introduction of aleatory before a firm understanding of non-aleatoric elements could lessen confidence and the ability of the individual musician to perform soloistically. As with all choral pieces, a conductor should be keenly aware of the given text in its original form. Performers may be better informed in many ways by studying the text in its native setting, including the following: by providing an understanding of the larger picture of dramatic arch, by determining pronunciation of homographs, by clarifying meaning through line, stanza, or special layout structure, by showing delayed rhyme schemes, and by elucidating any adaptations made from the original text and transferred to the musical setting. Proper and well-intentioned aleatoric settings can act as aid in finding dramatic focal points. The characteristics of aleatoric sections express a relatively immediate and sometimes drastic change in emotional content that either is the building up or zenith of drama. These dramatic points should be shared between the words and the music. An essential part of any score study should be the knowledge and understanding of, on a large and small scale, of the musical elements of a work. The composer's intention through their choice of compositional techniques works with the text in synergistic fashion to complement the storytelling. Pieces that use sections of aleatory will need extra attention paid to these transitions into and out of aleatory. Conductors will need to address the following questions. How does the non-aleatory music cease, and what forces does this involve before transitioning into aleatory? And how does the aleatoric section begin? If aleatory is used in an additive approach where individual voices enter at intervals, should the first few individuals be assigned? Could the first voice be different for each performance? What is the procedure for the addition of voices? Are the entrances randomized by strict or approximate time and/or following another voice? How does the aleatory move forward? Is the aleatoric section conducted in tempo or by cues? How does the aleatory end? Can voices end mid-text or mid-musical phrase? How does the ensemble acquire their entrance pitches for the next section? The answer to all these questions will define the conductor's responsibilities and will establish clear and rehearsed communication between ensemble and conductor. An ensemble's experience with specific musical eras and composers lends to faster rehearsal times and more informed performances through shared technical language, musical terms, instructions, etc. Given historical practices and a comfort and expectation for melodic and harmonic content. This benefit is no different with aleatory. Although aleatory is wide-ranging in its implementation, familiarity with other aleatoric pieces will help to encourage the musical risk-taking involved in aleatory. The following choral works either contain aleatoric choral writing or are entirely aleatoric. These selections represent a variety of aleatoric treatments as well as pieces from a wide time range. The suggested rehearsal techniques were determined using the aforementioned characteristics. This piece, commissioned and premiered by Texas Choral Consort, was performed in conjunction with Texas Choral Consort's performance of Franz Joseph Haydn's English oratorio, The Creation. An overall look at the piece reveals fragmented quotations from The Creation, set with modern techniques to convey the chaos of a primordial universe and musically bind it to Haydn's masterpiece. The piece begins with modern notation composition, use of orchestral and choral aleatory, as well as use of pitched water glasses in aleatoric fashion. The vagueness of sound eventually clears, revealing Haydn's familiar melodies. The piece ends with a crescendo of tutti forces and the choir proclaiming God in an Italian augmented sixth chord relative to the opening of C of The Creation. The following text is used in this piece. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, along with the three other languages of the exact same thing. An example of aleatory from this work is as follows. Measures 38 through 44. And aleatoric content, the aleatoric content is performer-controlled text and rhythm and is used to create an unclear picture through the use of multiple languages. An earlier section uses the same text and a similar aleatoric treatment at a softer dynamic. By the time the second iteration of multiple texts, the mystery of the text should be gone. This instance is more chaotic and intense. This section also uses the first verse of the book of Genesis in 4 languages. The section builds upon the crescendo of the previous 2 pages. The familiar motives of the creation from the previous pages have been replaced by less organized sound. The problem that is posed here is the changing pitch content with aleatoric text choices. The same texts from measure 7, which is the earlier instance of this, are given at measure 38. This time, however, the choir is singing fortissimo, and each section has its own pitch instead of octaves with other voices. Transition from non-aleatory section immediately prior will need to be rehearsed for the altos and tenors as their pitches change at the downbeat of measure 38. So right before this, the altos and tenors have musical elements that we're going to rehearse right now. So just the tenors and the altos. Starting back at measure 35. And. Rehearsal of the section, if done before the similar section at measure 7, should involve the conductor pronouncing all of these texts. Let me say them for you. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth.
In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth.
Am Anfange schuf Gott.
Am Anfange schuf Gott.
Himmel und Erde.
Himmel und Erde.
Au commencement Dieu.
Au commencement Dieu.
Créa le ciel.
Créa le ciel.
Et la terre.
Et la terre.
Nel principio.
Nel principio.
Dio.
Dio.
Creò i cieli.
Creò i cieli.
E la terra.
E la terra.
And then let the choir speak through it on their own time. Go ahead.
In the beginning,
and next, rehearsing with the choir with a accompaniment, but still having them speak so they can hear how long the phrase needs to be and how many times they need to repeat it. Here you go, right up, pretty good. And you're speaking. And now singing with pitch on a neutral syllable in the aleatoric fashion. So sing on da, but you can do it however you want. Here you go. And. Together, still starting at 38, now with words and with pitch. Then finally, we'll add the previous pages of music as well. The conductor should also remind the singers that the purpose of this and similar aleatoric section at the beginning is for the audience to catch oral glimpses of text that may be familiar to them. This can only be possible if enunciation, not cadence of delivery, is paramount. Due to the slow tempo, caution should be given to the singers regarding their vocal endurance, since there are several more pages of music, not to mention all of the creation following this. So here's from page 8. Has found wide acclaim in recent years for his use of contrasting diatonic and additive cluster chords, that is, chords with all diatonic members of its key present. Whitaker's manipulation of overwhelming dissonance is occasionally extreme divisi, followed by starkly clean triadic chords, paints the text of poets such as E. E. Cummings, Ogden Nash, Octavio Paz, and Charles Anthony Silvestri. The following is a quote from Andrew Larsen's, not related, article, Textural Density of the Choral Music of Eric Whitaker, found in the Choral Journal in December of 2006, which says, part of his compositional genius lies, however, in the accessibility of his works to listener and singer. Despite their lavish harmonies, the voice leading of individual voice parts is relatively simple. The pitch content of most voice parts consists of stepwise motion and triadic outline. It is the combination and intersection of simple voice parts that creates the frequently dense harmonic language exhibited in this repertoire. Cloudburst, written for SATB chorus, piano, and percussion, sets an adapted text, adapted by Whitaker himself, of an Octavio Paz poem. In order to provide as much tonal flexibility as possible, Whitaker sets this piece in the key of A, borrowing traits from both major and minor scales. Octavio Paz's poems, El Cántaro Roto, The Broken Water Jar, and Agua Nocturna, Water Night, are adapted for use by Whitaker. Paz's El Cántaro Roto is a poem of more than 1,100 words, of which Whitaker uses around 100. Whitaker also borrows lines 2 through 4 from Agua Nocturna, a shorter work of around 100 words. Interesting to note is the inclusion of the word relampagos, only given to the tenors and found at measures 72 and 75 of Cloudburst, but is found in neither poem. The octavo is published by Walton Music with an English translation by Lysander Kemp, which is on the screen. In Paz's poetry, one finds imagery that suggests a people in a circumstance may be not too removed from his own childhood, struggling to find water. Their quest to find water is such a sacred and spiritual part of their culture that it is flooded with mystical imagery. Their battle for survival and finding this liquid is so beyond their control and understanding that their search for water becomes an obsession that is dreamt, sung, and offered sacrifice. The following is an example of aleatory from this piece. This is measures 3 through 6 at the very beginning of the piece. The aleatoric content is performer-controlled rhythm and is used in mantra-like fashion. The text being sung is Eyes of Dream Water and Eyes of Shadow Water. The text refers to the use of prayers and dreamlike states to invoke the rain. Musically, cluster chords are used to represent the aural equivalent of water. A problem this aleatory poses lies in the transitioning out of the aleatory. Pitch for this selection is provided from measure 1, with each section holding to the same pitch content to express the text, ojos de agua de sombra or pozo, except for the baritone who changes pitch on their entrance at measure 5, beat 2. All entrances are individual entrances for each section in divisi and are accompanied by an initial accent in mezzo forte. Rehearsal should include tutti spoken walkthrough to ensure correct timing and accented treatment of each entrance. So from the very beginning, just speaking, 3. La And then we add pitch to that. Finally, in measure 7, a signal will be given to the choir to cue their last repetition of their text before holding on gua. repetitive nature of this section is a chant or mantra representing an entire people praying for rain. The repetition needs to sound desperate, and pleading, which can be accomplished by greatly varying the tempo of their delivery and stressing ojos, agua, and sombra. And here's the whole selection. Saul, composed by Egil Hovland and published in 1972 by Walton Music, takes the story of the conversion of Saul of Tarsus into St. Paul using the text of from the book of Acts from the New Testament of the Bible. The piece is written for SATB chorus, narrator, and organ. The text is an adapted setting, adapted by Frank Pooler, the editor of the series of choral pieces that bear his name and to which Saul belongs, of Acts 8, verse 1 through 4, 7 and 9, and Acts chapter 9, verses 1 through 4. The only aberration is the inclusion of Acts chapter 8, verse 9, with no use of the text in this piece. And here is Acts 8 through 9, or Acts chapter 8, verse 9, which is, "But there was a certain man called Simon, which before a time in the same city used sorcery and bewitched the people of Samaria, giving out that himself was some great one." So that obviously you'll hear is not involved in the piece at all, but he includes it in the text. Saul is reminiscent of a passion setting with a narrator role and a chorus as an active participant in the drama. Hovland uses the historical Christian figure's bold and sudden conversion from a tax collector and persecutor of Christians to an apostle and evangelist as the scene for this piece. Saul's conversion holds prominence in Christianity for the themes of redemption, personal salvation, and the position to which St. Paul did eventually climb. The use of the number 3 is significant in Christianity to represent the triune division of God. Hovland uses the number 3 ubiquitously in Saul. An example of this is the setting of 3 triplets on the organ at measure 10 and 11, and also at 12 and 13. Hovland also uses the major and minor third to construct melodic lines and accompanying chords. The constant juxtaposition of a chord with both major and minor characteristics could be interpreted as a division of Saul's soul, showing both good and evil. The choir and organ serve to reinforce drama in Hovland's opus. This first iteration of God's voice at measure 4 is in speech-like rhythm. Next, the organ that is present only with God's voice responds in a manner portraying the Spirit of God descending to Saul with chords that point to the fight over Saul's soul. The choral entrance at measure 17 is the voice of the synagogues of Damascus demanding the persecution of the Christians. The piece ends, however, with the voice of God asking, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" leaving the piece and his soul hanging in limbo. Hovland's use of aleatory in both instances of measures 1 through 3 and 15 and 16 has the choir entering with upper voices first and then lower voices starting quietly, pianissimo, and greatly crescendoing to its conclusion of fortissimo and fortissimo, respectively. The entrance asks the sopranos and altos to enter individually before the tenors and basses enter off a narrator cue, singing the same pitch content. For the second entrance, Hovland directs each section of voices to enter and recite on a single pitch successively after 1 second. These aleatory sections represent the persecuted Christians who, at first, were scattered, hunted, and frightened, and then resolved. So here are the aleatory sections for Saul, measures 1 through 3. The aleatory content is a performer-controlled rhythm and represents the scattering and hiding of the early Christians due to Saul's persecution. The text chosen for the choir possesses vivid imagery of the aggressiveness that Saul used against the Christians. The repetitive nature of the aleatory and the staggered entrances of the choir allow for a slow and full crescendo of volume and drama into the next page. Problems posed, the order of entrances and dynamic cues. As the direction, women enter independently You can sort of read that at the top under where it says canon. Women enter independently approximately half second apart indicates rehearsal for this first entrance will include assignment of the order of entrances. Usually, individually staggered entrances like this can be achieved through a physical direction. For example, starting with the front row, right to left, and then the second row. In this case, I've started with the left with Jessica, and we work, the sopranos and altos, we work this way, and then we'll snake back to the second row, and then we'll head that direction. And the same thing goes for the basses and tenors. But there is no right answer there. That's just the way I chose it. Once the progression is physically assigned, ask the singers to enter off the audible start of the person immediately prior to your entrance. So let's practice just speaking what you're going to speak in aleatory. Go. Great. And then basses and tenors doing the same thing. Large choirs may find that there is not enough narration to conclude all individual entrances, in which case having 2 or 3 singers enter at a time should provide the same aural building effect. The pitch content should take a minimum amount of time, if only to set the correct syllable to the correct pitch. As you can see, we just move up from the G sharp up to the B natural. The slow crescendo at the end of this section is 8 to 10 seconds long, moving from pianissimo to fortissimo. A gesture is required to denote the start of the crescendo, a midpoint at mezzo forte, and a preparatory cue for the attacca entrance into the next section. So following this, what you can't see is that it goes straight into the next page, which is another sung pitch. So let's just demonstrate this first section. Sorry, let's just start right on the singing entrance.
The disciples of the Lord.
Saul bringing threats and murder against the disciples of the Lord. Saul bringing threats and murder against the disciples of the Lord.
Here we start. Measures 15 and 16, the aleatory content is performer-controlled rhythm, and like the first example, this use of aleatory represents a group of people in hiding. However, this excerpt uses a slightly different treatment of the aleatory where the entrances are by section, so sopranos, altos, and tenors and basses, not individually. The increase in organization of entrances indicates a strengthening in resolve. This section is the charge and authorization put forth to Saul from the synagogues in Damascus to imprison all Christians that he finds. Like the first example, this section's slow and sure crescendo builds in volume and drama. Entrances and dynamic cues are the problems posed here, just like the first section. So here's the second section of aleatory. Start right on. A.
So that if any be found belonging to the way, men or women, who might bring them bound in chains back to Jerusalem.
Entire sections of voices enter collectively 1 second after the previous voice section in descending pitch order. Depending on the size of the choir, these entrances could be either conducted or left to the singer's responsibility. Again, we exit this section of aleatory with a similar crescendo as before, this time slightly slower to fill in a small increase in time. The conductor should show a cue to start the crescendo and a cue for the midpoint and a preparatory cue for the breath and release the choir prior to the sopranos and altos entrance. And now we'd like to perform the entire piece for you.
And on that day, a great persecution arose against the church in Jerusalem. And they were all scattered throughout the region of Judea and Samaria, except the apostles. Devout men buried Stephen, and made great lamentation over him. But Saul laid waste the church, and entering house after house, he dragged off men and women, and committed them to prison. Now those who were scattered went about preaching the word. Unclean spirits came out of many who were possessed, crying with a loud voice, and many who were paralyzed or lame were healed. Saul, breathing threats and murder against the disciples of the Lord. He went to the high priest and asked him for letters to the synagogues at Damascus, so that if any be found belonging to the way, men or women, he might bring them bound in chains back to Jerusalem. Now as he journeyed, he approached Damascus, and suddenly a light from heaven flashed about him, and he fell to the ground, and heard a voice saying to him,
In the performance notes for this piece, David Rosenboom attributes indirect inspiration from the article by Bruce Bauer that appeared in Science News in June of 1999. Bauer's article discusses the anthropological study of the practice of animism in remote cultures. Bauer initially illustrates this idea through the following story. While conducting fieldwork in eastern Canada more than 60 years ago among a hunting and trapping group called the Ojibwa, an anthropologist asked an old man if all the stones strewn about the landscape were alive. He reflected a long while, the questioner reported, and then replied, "No, but some are." Attunement is a paraphrase of the text of Bauer's article with some additional thoughts. Rosenboom sets his response with several lines of unequal prose before returning to the word attunement, mostly on a unison pitch. Rosenboom uses the music to demonstrate the viewpoints represented in humanity and history, pointing to a shared thread regarding our perceptions of the world around us. Bauer and Rosenboom's shared point is that we still anthropomorphize our world by naming our car, our boat, our possessions, etc. Are we really all that different than our past? Musically, the entire piece is open to aleatory influence as there are no rhythms provided, only pitch. Rosenboom illustrates this point in his performance notes by stating, each phrase of the text should be freely sung, but not too fast, on one or all of the pitches associated with it. As some segments of the text are given one pitch and some are provided with several, the selection of pitch is the responsibility and the challenge of the performers to determine beforehand, or, with good musicianship skills, choose in the moment their note path. Accompaniment is provided as harmonies, and may be comprised of one player or several. The ability of harmonies to provide pitch reinforcement is obscured by its many tone clusters. The following is an example of aleatory from this piece, or the whole thing is aleatory, so this is I just picked the first 9 chords. The aleatory content is performer-controlled rhythm and pitch. This piece uses aleatory to highlight the prose written by the composer. As mentioned before, the disparate nature of many voices eventually returning to unison illuminates Rosenboom's thoughts on the unity that all things possess and possesses all things. The first 4 chords texts establish Rosenboom's reaction to the article mentioned above. The next set of chords texts begins to set the argument with the establishment in the way that children think. Except for the first instance of attunement, the music for the entire piece harmonically expands away from and reduces to the word attunement. The problem posed in this section is pitch selection. Selection of pitch is the most important rehearsal topic of this piece. Pitches may either be assigned but with a mind to strategic voice leading prior to rehearsal, or allow singers to migrate and make decisions in performance depending on the level of the singer's collective musicianship. If the former is needed, generalities should be mapped out for the singers to choose. The conductor with a good ear or show of hands can determine if balance is achieved with each pitch change. Also, each singer should recite the text on just one pitch. If the latter is available, what we will demonstrate here, the singers should be rehearsed oscillating through all pitches, first on neutral syllables. So with on da and then we add text to that. Just speaking at one time, or singing one time.
Socializing with the rocks, as these in their light, expansion of hearts and wood knees, living along the continuous birth. Children of the world themselves.
Gradations of experience or skill may include assigning pitches but giving singers the option to move to others. Either approach will still need individual treatment of the rhythm of delivery for the text with a collective pause following the last word of each segment. And so here's the whole thing with also the top. Sorry. Here we go. Didn't applaud for that one. Sorry. The Emperor of Ice Cream, written for 8 voices, piano, percussion, and double bass. Do I have time to do this? Okay. Is a setting, can y'all stay? It's 50 right now. Okay. Is a setting based on a poem of the same name by Wallace Stevens. Reynolds employs a non-traditional score layout to illustrate movement of the singers in this staged quasi-theatrical work. Reynolds also asserts control over syllabic stress through the thickness of the word font, although its interpretation is aleatoric. Wallace Stevens was an American poet and wrote this poem in 1922. The Emperor of Ice Cream is in 2 stanzas, separating the scene of a funeral wake into 2 scenes. The first is about the people in attendance, and the second about the deceased. The use of the words muscular and concupiscent and wenches with women and boys creates a sexual tension contrary to the occasion. The wenches in their dresses as they dress as they are used to wear, and the boys bringing flowers in last month's newspapers, and the title of the poem give a childish, casual demeaning and almost forgotten reference to the woman that has died. Perhaps the idea that Wallace is sharing is that life will go on at an event reflecting the end of the life. The second stanza focuses on the uncomfortable feeling that death brings to the living. A sheet is brought from the dresser of deal lacking the 3 glass knobs that the deceased woman once enjoyed embroidering in her spare time. Her work, perhaps something she took pride in, is now used to cover her body and is too short to be used for this purpose. But we find that the sheet will do even if her feet stick out, because in the end she is dead and nothing more now. Life is the ice cream that needs to be enjoyed while it lasts. This example of aleatory from this piece, the whole piece is aleatory, or aleatoric. The aleatoric content, I've selected 25 seconds through 40 seconds. The aleatoric content is performer-interpreted notation. Reynolds' use of aleatory shows articulation at the same time while showing pitch or the lack of. The performer is asked to interpret the notation of their text in the performance. As a consequence, the ability to notate and read rhythm suffers, so a composite rhythm is provided by Reynolds to aid in rehearsing. You can see, you'll see a bigger version, but this is the part they actually sing. This is the rhythm that they actually sing, because it's harder with the way he's notating it to interpret the rhythm. He provides a rhythmic line for the performers. The section is talking about the previous roller of the big cigars, who is now in the kitchen whipping up some ice cream. The use of imagery throughout this poem juxtaposes opposites in order to paint a series of absurd scenes at a funeral wake. Reynolds adds extra text to Stevens' poem in order to increase the absurdity. The music, adding little in terms of melody, is part of this absurdity. Interpretation of the score and coordinating the entrances of the singers are examples of problems posed in this excerpt. So this is very freshly rehearsed. Some of the singers just saw this morning, so you will hear the rehearsal of this very much so. We'll start with the rehearsal of and you can see it a little bit clearer here. the order of their cutoffs is determined by when their word stops. So you can see some of their ands extend just a little bit farther and some of them stop. And also you can see the articulation is represented by how thick their font is. And so most of them have a D that's really thickly fonted or colored. And for example, third female right here, also her whole word is thick with font. So that is up to the performer to decide how to do that. So we're going to rehearse the and section, which is, it's very weirdly set up. But who goes first? Raise your hand. And second, and third, and fourth, and fifth, and sixth, and seventh, and eighth. Great. So here's and. So we'll all say and together. And go. And. So I'm not directing all of that. So after Trevor's entrance, or after Trevor cuts off, and then there are six successive cutoffs after that. And go. Yes. Now put it with the articulation that you have. Good. Sorry, I have to find that spot. Okay. And now we're going to move to the rehearsal of the pitch or the rhythmic part, starting here. So this is after the and, starting here with bid him within kitchen cups. So the composite rhythm with everybody speaking it together. And
Bid him within kitchen cups, cupids and curds.
for all of it is good in assigning a rhythmic line down here, the word scansion does not line up at all, which makes it even more frustrating and almost not as helpful. So that is the rhythmic, and now let's do it with your assigned syllables. So still speaking rhythm, but just with your assigned syllables. I'm sorry, let me explain. The assigned syllables, everybody has a little marker and assigned a different number, and there's male and female markers right next to it. So everybody has their assigned pitches, depending on what's marked in these little circles right here, which is a little bit harder to read through them. And then some people, and again, as I mentioned, this is a theatrical score, so it shows your direction. So you can see that you trace it back. This is fourth female. We'll start here in order, and this is on stage facing the audience. That's that way. So we're all standing here. Fourth female says and then says her bid. You have a pitch?
Bid.
Oh, you have bid. Bid sings bid, and then after that walks. Starting here. Walks down to that, which would be the stage right corner of the proscenium, down to here, and she sits down and also says. Crazy. Not crazy. Interesting. Okay, so then here is with your individual rhythm. And
Bid him
with
in
kitchen cups, cupids and curds.
good. So now we'll do the same thing with a collective, everybody singing all the pitches together. In your range, in your octave. So this is the composite of all of the pitches and several times, and now with your own individual parts. Ready and done. is, let's just say, put in your articulation. So look at how your note is written, how your word is written, and hold it for the length of time it also indicates. And there's more to be done. This is a prepared piano thing by putting a piece of paper, and then there's accompaniment with it as well as the snare drum thing here. Let's also add the extra things to it too. The periphery things. There's an N here, that's spoken, and an N here. Those are letters, they're just longer, which indicates how long they sing. And this is the time frame is up here, 25 seconds, but every 5 seconds it's marked on here. So this means to say your M for a long time. And then there's this other thing, and then peasant up here as well. Let's add all that together, and start from N. Let's start from N. In my conclusion, aleatory composition is nearing 70 years since its modern inception. In skilled hands, aleatory has 70 years. That's weird. In skilled hands, aleatory has the ability to portray every color in the emotional palette. With keen programming, aleatory works can augment, redirect, or add a completely new dimension to a concert. And yet, aleatoric choral works are rarely performed. That last one especially. Aleatoric choral music has the potential to be immensely powerful in its dramatic breadth, and at the same time overwhelmingly unfamiliar to even the most professional singer and conductor. With a base knowledge in fundamental rehearsal techniques, an informed conductor can synthesize the elements of composition, make an educated decision regarding intent, and efficiently rehearse an ensemble. Future possibilities of research include the following. Building upon Paul Griffith's categorization of aleatory genre, the potential exists for a classification system of vocal choral works with work towards this direction started by Istvan Anhalt in his book Alternative Voices. Although Anhalt analyzes the treatment of text in aleatory choral pieces and begins to group them into commonalities, his intention was not to make a comprehensive list of vocal aleatoric works. A catalog of vocal and choral aleatory works that include a classification system and text sources would be a valuable reference tool in concert programming. Also, an in-depth look at the etymology of the term aleatory should be considered. The musical world uses the term aleatory in broader definition than other disciplines. Etymological research into the musical and non-musical uses of aleatory would help define aleatory and may even lead to new uses and functions. I would like to offer my thanks to my committee members, Doctors James Morrow, Sonia Seaman, Dan Welcher, Suzanne Pence, Joseph Bolin, and Avery Slater, and to those that attended. And thanks to the UT Chamber singers, what is left of you. And Chris Keenan, accompanist. And I'm supposed to offer at this time if anyone has any questions. I'm supposed to address those. No. Please enjoy the refreshments. Thank you so much.